With rumors circulating of TV-14 returning to WWE, some fans rejoiced and thought, hey, it's gonna get better now, blood, this and that. Others made a joke out of it. Me personally, I think that if TV-14 does happen, Natalia's gonna get to say bitch unlimited times. Then there's others that felt not much would change since the same faces would run the show. The timeline on Twitter was talking all about this, and I thought, why not talk about the days where the company was leaning towards a PG rating? Around 2007, the wrestling industry as a whole was under scrutiny for several deaths. Many wrestlers passed away in 2007, especially compared to the previous years. To top it all off, the Chris Benoit tragedy occurred. It was a very dark summer which culminated in the suspension of over 10 WWE wrestlers for violating the wellness policy, and something had to change. The cleaning process, as I call it, took a couple of years to come to fruition and turn WWE into an attractive product for sponsors. But at this point, the WWE was anything but. With the creation of the Attitude Era, it allowed the WWF to create more intriguing, edgy storylines that stood out when compared to WCW. A lot of these ideas materialized from ECW, but the company popularized them. The TV rating throughout 1998 was mostly PG, in a year that saw Mick Foley get thrown off the cage, McMahon calling Kane and The Undertaker C's, Sable showing 3/4 of her body was PG, and it wasn't until a random Raw Zor episode in late 1998 was the show rated TV-14. This is mostly believed to be because of the controversial Undertaker's sacrifice of Stone Cold, and the product following this somehow got even wilder than it already was. The Ministry, GTV, The Godfather with the Hose. The show found even greater success with the rating, and the total revenue for each year was at a high. Even then, it was becoming harder to find sponsors. The image of the company was ruined, especially when you compare it to previous years. The PTC were complaining about SmackDown and its contents being unfit of the time slot UPN granted them. Some kids were emulating the moves, and it actually led to a kid dying from taking one of the wrestling moves. At the time, the sponsors stood out for their randomness, I say. It was the JVC Kaboom of the week, Lugs, and of course the most iconic Stacker 2. A lot of the sponsors were pretty bizarre, and this had to do with WWF's image at the time. Sure, Skittles, Snickers featured occasionally, but compared to today, there's fewer companies that would associate themselves with the WWF. At this point, the WWF was fresh off becoming an option on the stock market, and that in itself was a huge change to the company that would affect the future greatly. As for the product, the WWF was still wild as ever and shattered several rating records with a car crash style TV that gave you this feeling of anything could happen. The formula worked, and hell, they improved on it, and 2000 is arguably the greatest year in WWE history from a quality standpoint. Financially, it's of course one of the most successful, but most of the profits went to the XFL. This was as good as it was going to get from a financial area for a while. The purchases of WCW and ECW led to a several-year slump for the industry as a whole. On screen, the WWE was still trying out ideas from the Attitude Era despite entering a whole different time period. This was on Raw mostly with the HLA, Triple H doing whatever with a corpse, bra and panties matches, blood in abundance, and of course, the Playboy cover girl thing on a yearly basis. 2002 was very aggressive with that Attitude Era-esque image, but unlike 02, 2003 was the year where they realized, hey, half of that stuff is in the past, it's not working. Of course, bra and panties matches remained, blood was still drawn and whatever. By 2005, it was clear that there was a different identity within WWE. They had the new stars, the ratings were on the up, and all was good. 2006 happens, the ratings get higher with the move to USA. The buy rates were the best they had been in a while, and WrestleMania 23 was the most successful in over 6 years. But just after WrestleMania, everything changed. Now, from a product perspective, how was WWE in the final days of TV-14? Well, let's talk about it. The Divas were still the same Divas as they were in past years, but less often would they have those competitions where they're out there throwing water balloons or whatnot. The bra and panties matches were nowhere to be found, and the only match that had occurred at the time was between Melina and Candice Michelle on the March 19, 2007 episode of Raw. That said, every couple of months the Divas would do something such as one of those battle royals or a fashion show, and these segments compared to the early 2000s were pretty tame. Hell, the Divas search, which was notorious for taking up TV time and being so controversial, made almost no noise in 2007. Hell, I don't hear anybody talk about that Diva search in general. Other than that, the Divas slowly transitioned away from those segments of the 2000s. The Playboy was still around. You would see Maria promote as she was on the cover, but there wasn't those huge segments such as that Miller Lite thing at WrestleMania or the evening gown match from WrestleMania 20 where the women were stripping each other or whatever. The cover would be promoted. Yes, Snoop Dogg would come in, but it doesn't really go further than that. If you wanted to see something that resembled the early 2000s Divas, you'd have to tune into ECW. In between the ropes, Kelly hosted this thing called Extreme Expose, where she delivered these 5-star dances while some Pussycat Doll, Nelly Furtado song plays, whatever 2007 had to offer. Pink Lightning, Layla and Brooke by her side, left, right, and they'd go all out like it was for a title. These segments were a staple of ECW, and even after Kelly went solo, they continued. After WWE went HD, there were few and far between, and in a way, it seems weird seeing these types of segments in HD, because TV-14 for me is always associated with the era of old. Other than these things, the Divas featured in Timbaland's Throw It On Me music video. By the looks of it, if WWE was PG, the video would go down very differently. The way they were presented was slightly different compared to the early 2000s, and sure, they did some things, but it was very tame in general. When you look at it, it's not as wild as it was in the past. Usually when somebody spoke about the TV-14 era, the first thing they mention is the violence in action. Every week when you used to watch Raw, you'd see somebody take a mean-ass chair shot and JR's yelling about how the heel didn't have to go too far. Then the babyface's blood covers the mat. The final days didn't shy away from violence at all. Despite that summer and the attention WWE received, they weren't really letting go of the violence. Hell, when WWE went HD, one of the most exciting things for some fans was to see the blood in high definition. Hell in a Cell matches, for the most part, were at their full potential. Edge was taking out others with concertos. JBL's dragging Chris Jericho with a cowbell like he's nothing. And unlike the whole Divas thing, the violence aspect was not different at all compared to previous years. It was more the same because you'd see someone like JBL going out there killing Y2J, whooping Hornswoggle's ass inside a cage and at the hospital. Man, it was a menace to society or the WWE roster. You would see blood often, not too often like 2003, but it wasn't like anyone went, oh, I miss blood. Because on a random Raw or SmackDown, someone would get beat down. Chair shots to the head were still there in abundance. Umaga would be taking some of the most wicked shots on one side, and on the other, The Undertaker would be swinging like that person refused to buy him Jack Daniels. ECW from a violence standpoint was so dry, and it makes you wonder, like, why the hell is it even called that? Other than these things, the violence aspect itself was untouched. However, this is one thing that I noticed when you look at 07, 08 compared to 05 or whatever. The moments were spread out more. Like, you go back to 2004, 2005, every week, someone goes through a table, JR is angry, a woman takes a move or whatever. It was wild. Here, it's still wild, but when you look at previous years, it feels a bit laid back. Now, that's saying something when comparing it to the previous years, but if you compare it to 2010, it looks like the Attitude Era. One of the aspects of TV-14 that is important is, of course, the storylines. With that TV rating, it allows you more freedom to write the story you want. But basically, a blood feud couldn't be done under the PG rating. You have to push a bit of that boundary and get smart, as evident by this feud. Final days of the TV-14 era featured some storylines that couldn't be done in this day and age, at least to the utmost quality that they were. Blood feuds such as Chris Jericho and JBL, a feud that was driven by pure hatred and contempt of two totally different but eventually similar wrestlers. Edge and The Undertaker began bloody and ended bloody. Sure, the ending was after the WWE went PG, but the story itself in general was violent. Chris Jericho and Shawn Michaels was in its own way darker. Jericho basically blinded Michaels and tried to force him to retire, and add to that, they were the exact reason blading was banned just when WWE went PG. Looking at the stories, most of them would fit in any other era easily, just a few tweaks here and there, but for the most part, especially when you see what they were doing in the past years, it's very light. At the time, nobody obviously knew that WWE was going PG, but there was some signs when looking back. The fact that Hornswoggle became a main character for a bit, he was out here ruining lower card heels as Knights, blowing up the ring, making Carlito jump into a wall. Forget PG, half of this stuff was G-rated and belonged on Nickelodeon. John Cena's character significantly changed when compared to his 2006 self. The man used to rip apart his opponents on the mic, and now he was all about jokes. Of course, when it got personal, such as the Orton and JBL feuds, he would kick it up, but other than that, his character had been watered down. I mean, 2006 Cena slapped 2008 Cena for what he wrote on JBL's limousine. These moments were a little sign of what's to come. Moments in particular that gave off that TV-14 vibe were less often compared to previous years. Of course, there's Paul Burchill indicating something with Katie Lee, John Cena choking out JBL with the chain and drawing blood, but everything was clearly watered down a bit, especially after the summer. That said, I think everyone would take 2007-08 style WWE than what we have today. The blood was still there. It wasn't overdone like the early 2000s. Storylines had a little more freedom to them, and even though the the way the TV rating was used wasn't up to par as it was in previous years, and I'm not talking about the quality of the show, rather the elements of the show, I look at this time period fondly. So yeah. Alright, so those are the final days of TV-14. I wanted to look at how things were after the summer where WWE and pro wrestling in general was exposed or whatever it was. I wanted to see how different things were because I heard some say, oh, it was a bit watered down, and I kind of agree. You know, there was wild stuff, this and that, but in a way, it wasn't as intense as it was previously. It was, as I said, laid back. When you compare it to the PG era, it's of course crazy. You know? Alright, what do you guys think of this video? Please comment down below, and that's it for this video. Make sure you hit the R key on the like button, perhaps the FU on the subscribe button. Peace. I'm out.